Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of Iconic Freedom, The Formula. Here we set a standard for accountability and responsibility, the ownership of your choices and your outcomes and everything that follows. Let each care for self and all will be cared for. So when I talk about the formula, we talk about that periodic chart that you see on the various websites that this is posted on, where you create those elements that come together and bring harmony to your life. And if one of those elements in your life is not working, then you extract it and you reevaluate it and, again, bring that harmony to your life. This week, we're going to talk about something that many people experience, but few people fully understand, and that is love without losing yourself. And, how do you care deeply about another human being without slowly abandoning yourself in the process? Because many people, they were never, including myself, we were never taught the difference between love and attachment. We were taught that, love means sacrifice. Love means proving devotion through exhaustion, rescuing, overgiving, emotional labor, tolerating behaviors that slowly destroy your own peace of mind. And over time, they disappear. Not because love ruined them, but because they slowly erased themselves trying to maintain connection at all costs. And I think this is where a tremendous amount of suffering begins in relationships. If a person comes into a relationship and they're not whole, right? If they have not done the work for themselves to know themselves, then I think this is where suffering begins. And it's not because people, I care too much, but it's more because they care, but they have no boundaries. But because they care without boundaries, without self-respect, without clarity, without sovereignty, eventually they wake up emotionally exhausted. They'll get resentful, anxious, confused, wondering how they lost themselves inside of someone they once called love. I have mentioned it before about what I would consider a definition of love, which is I see you as you are, I love you as you are, change nothing unless it's something you wish to do for yourself. And maybe one of the first things that, needs to be said is that attachment is not the same thing as connection. Write that down. Attachment is not the same thing as connection. A lot of people confuse emotional dependency with intimacy. But connection allows two people to remain whole, right? No matter what the relationship is. It can be a love relationship, it can be family, it can be friends, it can be your parents. Oftentimes attachment will demand a fusion. Don't leave me or validate me, complete me. Remember that one? You complete me. Regulate my emotions, make me feel safe, make me feel worthy, make me feel. Connection says something very different. I posit to you that connection says, I choose to share life with you while remaining responsible for myself. Here we go again with let each care for self and all are cared for. And that's a very different energetic structure when you think about it. And many people don't realize that what they call deep love is sometimes, and I will say oftentimes, fear. The fear of abandonment, of loneliness, rejection, not being enough, fear of standing emotionally on their own. My mother was, she cornered the market on that feeling of, she never felt like she was enough. and that she feared standing emotionally on her own. I think it's why she left this world before my dad, because I don't think she wanted to deal with it. So what happens in those situations is a person will cling. They'll suffocate. They'll overfunction. They'll over-accommodate. They will shapeshift themselves trying to preserve the attachment. And slowly, they lose their identity. Instead of bringing themselves and who they are to a relationship, friendship, family, whatever it is, they lose their identity. They suppress their opinions. They avoid honesty. They tolerate disrespect. They abandon their standards. They become emotionally hypervigilant to every single little thing. You smiled this time and you didn't smile last time. You raised your eyebrow. You were breathing. You gave a heavy sigh. Constantly monitoring the moods, reactions, tones, the shift in energy. It's like, oy vey. But it's not because those relationships, those people are peaceful, but because they're trying to survive emotionally. And eventually, they don't even know who they are outside of the relationship anymore. And that is an important realization, because when connection requires self-erasure, it's no longer love. When your connection requires you to erase yourself, it is no longer love. If you are defined by the other person, it is no longer love. Now, you know what? That may sound harsh to some people, but reality is often clarifying before it is comforting, right? And I think many people aren't actually afraid of losing the relationship. I think they're afraid of meeting themselves without it, meaning that you now have to live with you. No matter what, you have the distraction of all the shenanigans you're doing, or the distraction of all the shenanigans the other person is doing, and you're not paying attention to self. Because when identity becomes wrapped around another person, their attention, their approval, their presence, then separation feels like annihilation. And this is where people often begin rescuing others while calling it love. They carry emotional burdens that were never theirs to carry. They solve problems nobody asked them to solve. They repeatedly interrupt consequences another person may need in order to grow. I mean, I said this recently to, one of my team, you're inserting yourself where you were not invited into a conversation, into a situation. And these people are calling it caring. But I have said this before, caring doesn't mean carrying. Sometimes rescuing is not compassion. Sometimes rescuing is fear. And I wouldn't even say sometimes, I would say all the time. Fear that if they stop over-functioning, they'll no longer be needed. And I mean, years ago, this was kind of the definition of codependency. And when some people build their entire identity around being needed, unconsciously they continually choose relationships where dysfunction guarantees their role. It's almost as though on another level, they are seeking the person that will give them that experience again and again and again. The fixer, the caretaker, the emotional manager, the rescuer. But responsibility of choice obligates accountability of outcomes. And when we continually remove accountability from others, we interfere with their growth as if we know. Not because we're loving them well, but because we're trying to stabilize ourselves through their dependency. Well, that's not connection. That's emotional entanglement. Now, this brings us to boundaries. And boundaries are one of the most, I think, misunderstood things in relationships. And I don't even know if I like the word boundary. I like the word standard. Because a standard is not rejection. A standard is clarity of who you are. A healthy standard simply says, this is where I end and where you begin. That's all. But many people fear boundaries. They fear standards because they think, if I stop over-performing, over-giving, if I stop over-accommodating, if I become honest about what I need, then the other person will leave. And maybe they will. But if authenticity causes the relationship to collapse, then the relationship was already unstable, right? It never was there to begin with. Healthy love does not require self-destruction to survive. In fact, love without standards almost always becomes resentment, because eventually the other person who abandoned themselves begins to feel unseen, unheard, unappreciated, when in reality they slowly stopped being honest about who they were in order to maintain the connection. And this is why self-respect is part of love. It's not ego or domination or control. It is self-respect, regard for self, the ability to remain connected to yourself while connected to another human being. And maybe that's what real intimacy actually is. Not emotional fusion or possession or control, but two whole people capable of standing on their own, choosing connection freely. Not from fear or incompleteness, but from alignment. We are aligned in let each care for self and all will be cared for. And that brings me to the anchor thought for this week's episode. And I wrote this down. Love would expand your life, not erase you from it. Real love supports growth. It supports honesty, individuality, peace, truth. It does not require performance. It does not require emotional captivity, if you will. And it does not require you to abandon yourself in order to keep someone close. Because some people don't lose relationships. They lose themselves trying to keep them. And maybe the real question isn't how much can I sacrifice to hold on to another person? Maybe the real question is, can I remain honest, free, peaceful, and whole while loving another human being? Because connection should never cost you your identity. Okay, hit that like button if you would. Share it with your family and friends. You never know how it might support them in their endeavor. All the fun links are below, and if you're inclined, feel free to subscribe on Buzzsprout. I am on X and Truth Social, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. The link to my newest book, The Christmas Cookie, Stories from the Counter, is listed below. I'd be grateful and honored if you chose to pick up a copy. It's a collection of heartwarming stories that I quietly say unfold the very principles that we talk about here each week. And until next time, stay sharp, stay sovereign, and as always, remember, let each care for self, and all will be cared for. Make it a great week.